Maestro Evengarde Rest is Ragusa's most powerful OC and the current master of the Temple of the Blade. He's responsible for training Etrian disciples of the Blade. You may know him as an optional boss you can fight, found within the Isle of Vigils. You may also know him as the wielder of the Tempest Eye, which is a dubious ocular ability which allows him to one-shot you if you spit on him. There's a reason I call him Ragusa's OC. He has a Sharingan from Timu, he's incredibly powerful, and he's a swordsman who comes from Place Japan. However, the topic of today's video is less about Maestro Evengarde himself, and more so about the naming conventions of maestros in general. That's right, Evengarde Rest is simply one maestro in a line of countless others, and 3 of such maestros have been named thus far. Not the typical topic I know, but there's a story behind all 3 maestros we currently know of: Maestro Evengarde Rest, Maestro Alcur's Legato, and Maestro Noctturn. Today, we'll be exploring the secrets locked behind each of their names and titles. Remember to subscribe, takes you 1 second and it'll be done forever. Thanks. First up is the maestro you're all familiar with, Maestro Evengarde Rest. The most obvious term that holds meaning within Evengarde's name would be his title, Maestro. While the title of Maestro refers to the current master of the Temple of the Blade in the world of Deepwoken, a maestro in reality is a title of respect commonly used within Western classical music. The word itself means master or teacher in Italian. This, for starters, establishes a musical motif that will flow through the 3 maestros we discussed today. Back to Maestro Evengarde Rest specifically though, when we pry the title from his name, we're left with just Evengarde Rest. Now, there's not much to work with here as far as I'm concerned. The term Evengarde itself doesn't mean anything. However, I do believe it draws influence from the French term Evanguard. Avant-garde, you see what I mean, right? Anyhow, the term avant-garde, when specifically referring to music, refers to music that is exceptionally innovative. Avant-garde pieces also typically reject or critique existing trends, and reject the status quo in favor of unique ideas. Now, if we were to continue with the motif of music established by the title of Maestro, Evengarde Rest himself is as avant-garde as one can be. For starters, we learn in the recently added Valvine game mode that Evengarde Rest is exceptionally powerful, even by the standards of Maestro. In fact, he's specifically named as the only man in the whole of Etris who could eventually duke it out with Lord Regent. Keep in mind this was stated 38 years ago, as that's when Valvine was set, but that means Evengarde Rest was showing enough promise to be named as a potential Regent killer from a very young age. It's not just that though. In fact, I think the maestro motif of music can be taken much farther. What other aspect of Deepwoken shares a musical motif? That's right, the song. What would an avant-garde application of the song, innovative and groundbreaking by definition, look like? Well, you won't get a better example than the Tempest Eye. That's right, I believe that Maestro's Tempest Eye is the avant-garde application of the song that his name, Evengarde, is alluding to. Not only is Evengarde generationally powerful, his predecessors did not share the Tempest Eye, meaning that the Eye would inherently challenge the ways of all maestros before him. The whole motif just fits very neatly, you get me? The song, Maestro, Evengarde, and Avant-garde. It may not necessarily be intentional, but the connection here deeply interests me. And it's not just our Maestro who fits this trend either. Next up is Maestro Alcur's Legato. Like Evengarde, there's one word in his name that means nothing as far as I know, that being Alcursed. However, Legato once again ties into the motif of music that we've got going on here, as legato indicates that musical notes should be played or sung smoothly, such as the transition from note to note is made with no intervening silence. Alcurst, in case you're not familiar with him, is the maestro that was active 38 years ago in the midst of when the new game mode Valvine is set. He's essentially a grizzled version of Evengarde who seems to be significantly weaker, but I'm sure he's still nothing to scoff at. However, we're told by Alcurst himself that he attempted an assassination attempt on the life of the Lord Regent, which could be the reason as to why Legato is included in his name. By attempting to secretly assassinate Regent, even though Regent unfortunately discovered the attempt, Alcurst was attempting to smoothly and discreetly deal with Regent, much like the smoothness and subtlety practiced by Legato in sheet music. This also suggests that Alcurst preferred to deal with threats via subterfuge rather than direct combat, unlike Evengarde. Just some food for thought though, but the point is, Alcurst Legato still fits this metaphor of ours. The last maestro on our list is Maestro Noctturn, who we only see mentioned by name. In fact, we only know of this maestro because he was Alcur's predecessor. In addition, we only have one word of his name to analyze, but it's all we need, because Nocturne does too tie into the motif of music that the previous maestros had going on. To be precise, a nocturne is a musical composition that is inspired by the night. Once again, a maestro follows the naming conventions that we've established thus far, and I believe that I'd be forgiven for not thinking that this video is merely cataloging a series of coincidences. Here's your TLDR. The position of maestro is not unique to the maestro we know. In fact, there's been generations of maestros, and we currently know 3 by name. The names of each maestro are interlinked with an allegory of music, potentially tying into the song itself. The name Evengarde of the maestro we know likely alludes to avant-garde, a term which generally refers to new or experimental concepts in art, potentially alluding to our current maestro's status as unusually powerful, or referring to the novelty of his temperstai. Legato, of Maestro Alcur's Legato, Valvian's maestro, is an indicator that music notes are to be performed smoothly with no intervening silence, potentially referring to Alcur's preference for subterfuge and stealth. Nocturne, of Maestro Nocturn, who was Alcur's predecessor, is a musical composition that is inspired by the night. That's all from me. Like and subscribe for more lore updates. Bye.